Welcome to Tales in the Dark, where real-life moments take a dark turn. In Story 11, a family trip to a wedding becomes a chilling encounter with strange dreams, eerie occurrences, and a lurking presence that can't be ignored. Prepare yourself for my sister's wedding, and remember, if you love spine-tingling tales, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Now, let's dive into the unknown. Story 11. My sister's wedding. It was supposed to be a joyful weekend, a chance to celebrate my sister and create happy memories. But what started as a simple family trip soon became something else entirely, filled with strange occurrences and an eerie presence we couldn't ignore. I suppose I should start with the basics. I'm a mother of 4, and yes, it's as hectic as it sounds. My oldest son is 7, and his siblings trail behind him, each a year apart. Life with them is a whirlwind of little hands, loud voices, and endless questions. So, naturally, when my sister announced her wedding in Colorado Springs in April, it felt like both an exciting getaway and a logistical nightmare waiting to happen. The trip would involve all 8 of us: my husband, myself, our kids, and my parents. We planned every detail carefully, flying into Denver on Friday around noon, renting a van, driving to Colorado Springs, and settling into an Airbnb for 3 nights before flying back on Monday. It seemed straightforward, but little did I know, this would be a weekend I'd never forget. Friday morning came quickly, and it was all hands on deck. I woke up early to prepare breakfast for the kids, knowing we had a long day ahead. It was the first time we'd traveled by plane with all 4 kids, and just navigating the airport felt like running a small army through a battlefield. Thankfully, my parents were there to help corral the kids, allowing my husband and me to handle check-in without incident. Still, keeping track of them was no easy feat, especially with the youngest clinging to me for dear life as we moved through the bustling terminal. The flight itself was mostly smooth. The kids were surprisingly well behaved, though our youngest got fussy during takeoff and landing. His little face crumpled in pain as the pressure affected his ears, but he held it together well enough. I had braced myself for disaster, yet somehow we managed. It wasn't until we landed in Denver that things began to unravel. After gathering our bags, we headed to the car rental counter, only to find that the van we had reserved wasn't available. We were left waiting in the chilly airport parking lot, surrounded by strangers and restless kids, as they scrambled to find us a replacement. An hour later, they finally brought around a different van, and we set off, hoping for a smooth drive to Colorado Springs. The scenery was breathtaking, mountains dusted with fresh snow from the previous night's storm. The kids marveled at the sight, pressing their faces against the windows, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. But then, halfway through the drive, the van began to lose power. The engine sputtered, lights flickered, and we slowed to a stop. My husband called the rental company, and they advised us to wait at a nearby gas station for a replacement. Nearly 3 hours passed before they arrived with another vehicle. As we resumed our journey, the landscape became a striking winter scene. Thick, wet snow clung to every branch, its weight bending them under the load. The trees looked burdened, with many branches snapped and broken, littering the ground like remnants of a fierce storm. The snow-covered neighborhood looked as though a tornado had torn through, scattering branches of all sizes across yards and sidewalks. I pointed out the view to the kids, drawing their attention to the unusual beauty of the snow-draped trees, and we marveled together as we made our way toward the Airbnb. The house loomed in front of us, a 2-story Victorian with faded paint and a sagging fence partially crushed by a fallen branch. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and earth, and the wind rustled through the broken branches, making an eerie, creaking sound that seemed to echo through the empty yard. There was a separate, smaller structure in the back, a mother-in-law house, sitting in the shadows of the alley, almost hidden. In the photos online, the house had looked charming, but up close it felt different. Its windows were dark, giving it a vacant, almost haunted look, the kind of house you'd expect to see on a foggy hill in an old horror film. We were able to get inside, but the power was out thanks to the fallen tree branches that had pulled down power lines in the area. We unpacked as best we could by flashlight and decided to take the kids to explore Colorado Springs while we waited for power to be restored. I called the host, who reassured me that the electricity should be back soon. We decided to take the kids to the Penny Arcade in Manitou Springs, a sprawling wonderland filled with flashing lights, jingling sounds, and machines from every era. This wasn't just any arcade. It felt like stepping into a time capsule, with room after room filled with everything from modern games to antique machines that had delighted generations. The air was alive with the chatter of other families, the buzz of electronic sounds, and the clinking of tokens as they dropped into each machine. The kids were thrilled. My 7-year-old darted from one game to another, clutching a small handful of tokens, his eyes wide with excitement. He was particularly fascinated by the old-fashioned fortune teller machines. He dropped in a token, watching in awe as the machine creaked to life, its mechanical hand shifting to reveal a cryptic fortune card that he took with reverence, reading every word. Meanwhile, the younger ones were all about the carousel tucked in one corner of the arcade. The little horses spun around to a cheerful tune, their faces lit up with joy. When they weren't on the carousel, they lined up for the claw machines. Every time they dropped in a token, they'd hold their breath as the claw reached out, barely missing the stuffed toys inside. With each near miss, they burst into laughter, eager to try just one more time. My husband and parents joined in too, reliving childhood memories through the games. My husband challenged the kids to skee ball, the balls thumping down the lanes with each toss as everyone cheered and tried to beat each other's scores. My parents gravitated toward the antique shooting gallery, where they took turns aiming at spinning targets, laughing at the surprisingly responsive metal ducks that swung around each time they scored a hit. I found myself just watching, savoring the kids' happiness as they moved through the arcade, mesmerized by the endless choices. There was something magical about this place, almost surreal. After a few hours of games, laughter, and pure joy, my phone buzzed with a message from the Airbnb host, letting us know that the power had finally been restored. Relieved, we gathered the kids and made our way back to the house, feeling the satisfaction of a fun afternoon. Back at the house, I took a moment to explore the rooms, noticing how small and intimate each space felt, as though they held stories from years past. The hardwood floors creaked with every step, adding to the sense that the house had a lot of history. The dim lighting seemed to soften the rooms, casting gentle shadows that added character rather than mystery. Certain areas felt cooler than others, even with the heat on, and each room had its own distinct charm, blending the past with the present in a cozy, if slightly drafty, atmosphere. After settling into the Airbnb with the kids, my husband and I chose the upstairs room on the right, while the kids took the room on the left. My parents settled into the room on the first floor, just off the kitchen. Our room was the largest in the house and the only one with carpet, a soft, neutral color that added a bit of warmth to the space. To the right of the entryway, there was a small closet with a single white bifold door, and in the middle of the right wall, a low door panel opened into a crawl space. A single window, positioned at the head of the bed, overlooked the quiet street outside, casting soft light into the room during the day. That first night, sleep didn't come easily. The unfamiliar quietness of the house kept me tossing and turning, unable to find a comfortable position. Every creak seemed amplified as the house slowly warmed up from the earlier power outage. I could hear the steady hum of the heat blowing through the vents, and the occasional gust of wind rattling the window pane. Now and then, faint footsteps seemed to echo from the kitchen downstairs. The room felt strangely uncomfortable, as though there was something slightly off, but I brushed it off as simply the unease of adjusting to a new, unfamiliar place. Morning arrived, and with it, the preparations for my sister's wedding. I slipped quietly out of bed, leaving my husband to catch a few more moments of sleep, and went downstairs to prepare breakfast with my mom. The kids ate quickly, more eager to play than sit, but I managed to gather them and help them into their wedding outfits before focusing on my own preparations. As I was putting on my makeup, my husband walked in and asked how I'd slept. I told him it hadn't been a restful night. The unfamiliarity of the house kept me tossing and turning. He chuckled, mentioning how he'd fallen asleep almost instantly from the exhaustion of our long day of travel. But then his tone shifted, and he hesitated before sharing the strange dream he'd had. In his dream, he explained, he'd seen a dark shadow slip out from the closet across the room. His voice wavered slightly as he spoke, and I could see the fear still lingering in his eyes. My stomach tightened, and a shiver ran down my spine as I imagined the scene. It was as if the fear from his dream had reached out and gripped me too, making my skin crawl. The figure moved silently toward the bed, lingering on my side, watching me as I slept. Then, slowly, it crept around to his side, pausing before reaching out to grab his leg and pulling him down toward the floor. He described the feeling of resistance, struggling against the shadow's grip, his arms straining as he tried to pull himself back toward the bed. He was dragged closer and closer to the closet, his fingers scraping against the carpet, until, just as he neared the open closet door, he jolted awake. When he woke up, he said he scanned the room, catching sight of the closet door slightly opened. Seeing me asleep beside him, he dismissed it as a vivid dream and drifted back to sleep. But now he asked if I had opened the closet door during the night, adding that he distinctly remembered it being closed when we went to bed. I thought back to when I'd briefly explored the room the previous night, opening the closet to peek inside. I told him I'd definitely closed it afterward. A chill prickled down my spine as he shared his dream, and I felt a sudden, irrational need for company. So, as I finished getting ready, I insisted that he stay upstairs with me. After I finished getting ready, we headed out to my sister's wedding. It was a beautiful celebration, and seeing so many familiar faces and meeting new ones made it even more memorable. I met a lot of my brother-in-law's family, made new friends, and enjoyed some amazing food. The kids, on the other hand, had trouble sitting still during the ceremony. I spent most of my energy keeping them in line, but thankfully, it went better than I'd anticipated. We stayed through the after-party, though we left before the end since the kids were exhausted. After I changed, removed my makeup, and brushed my teeth, I returned from the bathroom. The sight of the closet door, now wide open, hit me like a shock. I stopped in my tracks, my breath catching as my eyes adjusted to the dim room. It was closed before. I was certain of it. The sudden realization sent a chill down my spine, and I stood there, staring into the dark, empty space, feeling as though something was staring back at me. A slight, cold breeze brushed against my arm, and instantly, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Goosebumps prickled across my skin, and a shiver ran down my spine as my mind flashed to my husband's dream. Not wanting to dwell on it, I rushed downstairs to join him, deciding not to ask if he'd opened the closet. I knew if he told me he hadn't, my mind would only spiral further. So, brushing it off, I tried to act like nothing happened. After relaxing in the living room, catching up on my social media, and posting some photos from the wedding, my husband and I headed back upstairs to sleep. As I walked into the room, I couldn't help but glance over at the closet to see if it was still open. To my surprise, it was now closed all the way. My heart began to race, pounding 100 miles an hour as a million thoughts rushed through my mind. I was certain the closet door had been open earlier, and now it was shut tight. My husband had been with me the entire time downstairs, so there was no way it could have been him. Trying to calm myself, I told myself it must have been my imagination, that maybe I'd been seeing things earlier, influenced by the story my husband shared. I brushed it off as paranoia, trying to convince myself it was nothing. I decided to keep quiet about the closet, not wanting to alarm my husband. So, I took a deep breath, trying to act like nothing had happened, and settled in for the night. My husband fell asleep almost immediately, his loud snores filling the room. I envied how easily he could drift off, blissfully unaware of the unease that kept me wide awake. His obliviousness was almost comforting, a stark contrast to the tension that weighed heavily on my mind. I tossed and turned, feeling uneasy, and every few minutes I would open my eyes to check if the closet was still closed. The memory of it standing open earlier made me paranoid, so I kept glancing over to reassure myself. After drifting in and out of sleep, I finally dozed off. Despite my efforts to calm down, an uneasy feeling lingered, making me fear what sleep might bring. As soon as I drifted into sleep, I slipped into a vivid dream. In it, I watched as the closet door began to creak open, inch by inch. From the dark space inside, a shadow slowly emerged, stepping forward in a way that felt deliberate and menacing. It moved to the side of my bed, standing close, just staring at me. I tried to make out its features, but it was nothing more than a dark blur, a formless, faceless shadow. Even the dim light from the window couldn't penetrate it. It absorbed the light, a blackness darker than the night itself. Frozen in terror, I couldn't move. I wanted to scream, to shift, to do anything, but my body was paralyzed with fear. The shadow suddenly wrapped itself over me, its cold weight pressing down, suffocating. I struggled against it, desperate to break free, but it held me firmly, almost as if feeding off my helplessness. After what felt like an eternity, it finally released me, only to seize my ankles, gripping them tight. My body still locked in terror, I felt it begin to drag me from the bed toward the closet. I fought to scream, but no sound came out, my throat as frozen as the rest of me. I was powerless. Just as I was pulled to the middle of the room, I jolted awake, gasping for air, my heart racing. I scanned the room, and my gaze immediately fell on the closet. In the glow of the streetlights outside, I could see it was no longer closed. It was slightly open again. A wave of panic washed over me, and my entire body tensed, anticipating something, anything, to emerge from the darkness. I reached out and shook my husband awake, whispering urgently for him to turn on the light and close the closet. Groggy, he got up and shut the door, then fell back to sleep almost instantly. But I couldn't. My mind was racing, and the fear lingered, keeping me wide awake. I picked up my phone, using it as a distraction, but my eyes kept drifting back to the closet, watching it carefully to make sure it stayed closed. I stayed up the rest of the night, unwilling to let my guard down. It was morning again, and I got out of bed to prepare breakfast for my family, making sure my kids were fed and ready for the day. After helping them get dressed, I went to the bathroom to get myself ready. While brushing my teeth, I suddenly heard a faint click from my room, a sound so soft it was as if someone had gently nudged the closet door open. I froze, toothbrush paused mid-stroke, listening carefully to make sure it wasn't just my imagination. But then I heard it, a quiet, deliberate creak. My heart raced as I recognized the sound. It was the closet. My mind flashed back to last night's dream, and my imagination ran wild, picturing something lurking in that dark space, waiting. Without thinking, I spat out the toothpaste, rinsed quickly, and bolted downstairs, trying to keep calm so as not to alarm my parents or kids. I spotted my husband on the sofa and, trying to stay composed, I motioned for him to follow me to the kitchen. Once there, I told him what I'd just heard upstairs. Nervously, I insisted he come with me to check it out. When we got to the room, I held my breath as he opened the door, but to my surprise, the closet was closed. Nothing seemed out of place. Still, the thought lingered, and I asked him to stay with me while I finished getting ready. It was our last day in Colorado Springs, and we had plans to take the kids sightseeing before heading home. After a drive around town, we stopped by the mall for lunch. While my parents took the kids to ride the mall train, I finally gathered the courage to tell my husband about the dream I'd had after the wedding, the one where the shadow came out of the closet and tried to drag me in, just as it had done to him. I explained that when I woke up, the closet door was actually open, which was why I'd woken him to close it. As I told him this, his face paled. He admitted he'd also had a strange dream that night, which he'd nearly forgotten until now. Just before I woke him, he dreamt that he saw the shadow reaching for me, trying to pull me into the closet. In his dream, he'd tried to get up to help, but he couldn't move, as if paralyzed. He hadn't thought much of it until he realized our experiences matched. After sharing our stories, we both felt uneasy. We sat in silence for a moment, letting the gravity of our shared experiences sink in. It was clear that whatever was happening in that room wasn't just a trick of our imaginations. My husband finally broke the silence, suggesting we leave as soon as possible. I nodded, the fear in his eyes mirroring my own. We talked about the strange coincidences, the dreams, and the unsettling feeling that lingered in the house. The decision to leave early was mutual and unspoken. Neither of us wanted to spend another night in that room, and the thought of staying made my skin crawl. It was time to get out, and we both knew it. Staying another night at that Airbnb didn't feel like an option anymore. We still had one night left on our booking, but we decided we'd leave early and drive back to Denver to find a hotel instead. We didn't want to spend another night in that room. When we returned to the house, we packed quickly, loading the kids and our belongings into the car. Before leaving, my husband and I did a final walkthrough to make sure we hadn't forgotten anything. As we made our way down the stairs from the second floor, a soft, familiar sound stopped us in our tracks, a faint click from the room we'd stayed in. We both froze, glancing at each other, our ears straining in silence. Then we heard it. The unmistakable creak of the closet door slowly opening. The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop instantly, and a cold chill ran down my spine. The sound was almost painfully loud against the silence, each creak echoing as if something sinister were just beyond the door, waiting. A chill ran through us, and without a word, we rushed down the stairs, and I went straight to the car. I quickly opened the passenger side door and sat there, my heart pounding as I waited quietly for my husband. He struggled to lock up the house, but finally, he hurried over, got into the car, and started driving. As we pulled away, I could see the tension in his face, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. Once we were on the highway, a weight lifted from my chest. I finally exhaled, feeling as though I'd escaped something I couldn't quite explain. As we close the chapter on this chilling tale, we're reminded that old historic houses hold secrets buried in their shadows, things that emerge when we disturb them. They carry memories and energies that sometimes surface, especially when provoked. What made this encounter unique was that the couple faced it together, standing side by side against the unknown. They made the swift decision to leave before things escalated further, choosing to protect themselves and their family. When confronted by the mysterious, unity is their greatest strength. If you've been captivated by these spine-chilling stories and yearn for more journeys into the unknown, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Because here, in Tales in the Dark, the shadows are never far, and the next story is always waiting.